Welcome to Breaking Banks. Welcome back to Breaking Banks. I'm your host, Brett King. Well, we have one of our regular contributors and participants on the show, collaborators, if you like. Her name is, of course, Theo Lau. She has a brand new book out called The Metaverse Economy, How Finance Professionals Can Make Sense of Web3. And so I thought we'd better get her on the show and talk about the new book. Theo, welcome back to Breaking Banks.
Thank you so much for having me. Love it every time when I come back.
You just got back from Hong Kong, right?
I did, literally, physically. I am jet lagged. I spent 6 weeks there, believe it or not.
Wow.
It did not feel like 6 weeks, but yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't been for a while, but I think I either have to go to Hong Kong or Singapore just to get my US visa renewed. So
I remember you had mentioned that. Yeah. And there's always a good dose of humidity and excitement. I would say the space feels very different. Don't you think?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I've still got my business there, of course. So anyway, your last book was more about social good and the community, but you feel like you've sort of got back to your roots here in terms of, it is something that from a technology perspective, I can see as part of your wheelhouse.
I knew you were going to ask that.
But why the metaverse, and why now? Because obviously there's two sides of the coin here. The one side is that Meta's pumped a bunch of cash into this and it hasn't yet sort of taken off, and Decentraland and so forth are struggling. But on the other side of this, you've got Apple about to launch the biggest device ever with virtual reality capabilities that obviously lead to greater immersive experiences.
Yes,
and Apple doesn't do these things. They don't lose on these things. You could talk about Newton or Lisa, but they always led to something bigger and better in the space. So
you're very right. I still remember the Newton days, but it's an interesting question. I think in parts we got a little lucky too, because when Arun and I started writing the book, I still remember my first chapter was penned in Hong Kong a year ago while I was in quarantine hotel, staring at the beautiful city, and I'm like, oh my God, what on earth are we doing here?
I wrote most of Bank 2.0 in Hong Kong.
Isn't it wild? And fast forward through the last, I would say 20 months or so, it's been a wild ride. There are no lack of negative stories, as you say. As you pointed out, people were talking about, hey, Meta is tanking. This is a stupid idea. I've actually had a lot of people reached out to me the last 2 weeks, like, what are you doing? We thought Metaverse died. But as you pointed out, rightfully so, Apple Vision Pro is coming out. And I think one of the things that we stressed in the book is that, look, the way that Metaverse can materialize, and this really, really well from your work and from Miss Metaverse work, is we are not close to where we will be and when we need to be. This is evolving. It's no different than asking someone back in the 80s, hey, what would the internet be like? No one would think that, we'll be hailing a cab with an app. We didn't think that we're going to be carrying
only designers use a mouse. Only designers
exactly. Remember when the first iPhone, even back then when it came out?
I don't need Facebook. I'm not a college student.
Exactly. So I think there's still so much that could happen. And I'm glad you brought out Beyond Good, because it does on surface feels like really different than the last book I wrote. But this one, in collaboration with Arun, part of what I wanted to make sure that we bring forth is the concept of community. There's a lot of things that's been happening with our current state of affairs with the internet, where, we keep talking about inclusion, we keep talking about needing different voices in the ecosystem, but yet has not materialized. And I'm hoping that we can get in early with this next version of what it's going to be like and bring in different voices.
Great.
See,
it also No,
Correlation.
I see the correlation. Um, you could argue, right, that Web3 and decentralization and DeFi and so forth, as well as CBDCs, they're sort of two sides of one coin. And this is just the digitization of the world is happening, right? And the internet sort of enabled that. And then if you look at smart glasses or augmented reality, and you look at if you look at it on a trending basis from like the 1960s through to today, then what you have is computers getting significantly more powerful as they get older, right? As with each generation, and cheaper, obviously, Moore's law. But at the same time, the interface evolves to the simplest form of operation. So you have a baby that can operate an iPad right now, right? But where do you take it from here for something simpler? You integrate it with the body. So you use gestures for control, you augment your vision, you augment your hearing. That is the logical extrapolation of where computing goes. There's no use fighting it. It's only a question of when, not if, based on, like innovation in the past, right? I mean, that's what I would argue.
I agree. I'll add to it too, is I think it is going to happen regardless of what we think about it, right? Just like digital assets. The question that I want to make sure that we bring forth is, let's not leave too many people behind. And as simple as that, as it evolves, where are the use cases and what do they serve and who do they serve, is an interesting question. And that's why I always tell people, and this, Brett, you're sitting in Asia at the moment, and I just came back from there. There are a lot more interesting use cases that people are poking at in Asia than we do in the US. People are looking at what can we use for education, for example, HKUST, they're looking at building a physical digital twin campus between Hong Kong and Guangzhou, which is very fascinating. South Korea, there's so much going on there. And it makes me wonder, remember those days back then when, oh my goodness, when we still used to have phones in the US, the CDMA ones, where we cannot take to Europe and Asia, and they're so crazy. Oh my God, that was insane. I had two phones because of that. But where there were physical and digital borders, if you will, we had walled gardens and all of that. So could this be an evolution where we break that down? I would love to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's indeed possible. I think AI may even be a more powerful tool in that respect, as long as it's not, like I think the genie's roughly out of the bottle, and I think we're already at the point where we don't know enough about how AI does what it does to control it in the way we think we are. But anyway, I don't want to get off the track. Because it's not an AI show. But in the book, obviously you go into more of the sort of industry flavor stuff. And, obviously you've been deeply involved in the fintech space, over the last few years. So you've got a good sense of what's been happening there. But I look at this, and I look at this as sort of a lot of definitions and a lot of work in sort of establishing, what is Web3, what are NFTs, what's DeFi, and so forth. And then then you can get into the economic models and so forth in the second half of the book. But do you think that was really, a necessary part? Or you think that those terms are still confusing to mainstream, financial professionals, or?
That's an interesting question. I think it is still, that's a really broad question, Brad. I think it is, it can be confusing, but again, I will go back to ask you, remember, was it last year? Someone asked that question and it stuck with me. Do consumers really care if you are using a neobank versus a bank that you have a branch? So long as they can get what they need to get to, right, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that that is the gist of it. You can call it, NFT is more than just, an ape. It also represented an identity. It also represents what it could be in the future and what we leverage it for. And it's the same thing for the metaverse, where a lot of the movement and a lot of conversations started was more so for the creator side. How do they get a bigger piece of the pie? And so it becomes a vehicle for them to get to what they need to get to create a community, to have ownership of what they do. And where does that evolve to? I think when it brings into the pot of banking, what is interesting, maybe definition is a good word for it, but more so what it represents. It doesn't represent setting up just like someone's digital portrait in the metaverse and call it you're in the metaverse. That doesn't count. How would you want it to come across to serve the people? That's what matters. And I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, I think that's fair. Yeah, in terms of the industry overall, there's obviously been fairly rapid maturation, but the reality is, if we are talking about building communities in the metaverse, I could see people coming into a platform and building communities that are involved in creating a world on that platform, for example, or, come together for certain, for gaming or entertainment reasons or whatever. But at the same time, you still have the problem of affordable devices, and broad accessibility to high quality internet and better battery tech for the headsets, because right now you either have to have them plugged in or you have to carry this big battery pack for the premium devices. So we're still in sort of that early prototyping stage. But using the analogy of Ready Player One and the Oasis, and again, this is an interesting argument, because you could see something like a platform like Oasis emerging out of some of these models, as an example. But you're not necessarily getting something decentralized. The whole point of this was that there was, of the movie or the book was, there was, one person that had control of this entire realm, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And that's more likely what we see, with Meta's pursuit and so forth. But, how do you build a platform that can really build a convincing, metaverse environment, if it's not, had billions of dollars of development put into it? I can see it from the industrial Web3 perspective. I can see that building up by a community, no problem. But when it comes to sort of the broader view of what the metaverse is, in terms of not the digital twin concept necessarily, but the sort of Ready Player One, Meta Horizon Worlds type vision, right?
I think that's a fair point. I don't know either. I think Arun might have an idea. I don't know. I will be honest with you.
So he's done more of the economics portion of the book too, right?
Mm-hmm. He is. Yeah. He is.
Which there's some compelling arguments I flicked through earlier in terms of some of the logic, in terms of the models. I think he made some good points there. So
he's been in it for 3 years, Brett. Yeah. So I think one of the things
the book took you 3 years to write.
No, he started having a concept of so I'll give you a background of how this happened. This was a year and a half ago, and I just went back on the road because kind of got locked in for a little while because of this little thing that we called COVID.
The situation.
The situation. That's a good way to term it. And then I took my first trip, and that was to London, and that was for Finovate Europe. And I remember Arun and I met for lunch, and he told me he's deep in this metaverse thing, and he is working with Bulliverse, and he's talking about gaming. Now, background. My kids do gaming. They love Roblox.
Right. Roblox. Right? Roblox. Team Roblox here with
Roblox. Exactly.
My two kids as well, Charlize and Thomas. We play every weekend together, no matter where in the world. Yeah.
That's what we do. So we play in Roblox together. But that's my understanding of the gaming.
Yeah, that's a good proxy for the metaverse, right?
That was
early prototype metaverse, if you like.
That was it, and it still is a great example of how you gather people together and they want to do something and spend time together.
Yeah.
And that's the kids' modern version of play dates. They sit next to each other with computers. I don't get that, but okay. And that was how this all started. He talked my ear off, and I was skeptical. He will tell you that I was extremely skeptical. And I told him, what the hell is this? He came from financial inclusion VC funding, looking at emerging economies, to now he's all in gaming and metaverse. And I said, you know what? Let's put all the thoughts together in a book and see where that goes. And so that's where that went. But what was really interesting and eye-opening is that by doing that, and that was when we wrapped up and the Apple announcement came, was what resonated, and you touched on it earlier, the business part of it. The not so much so the consumer metaverse, but what the businesses could use with this metaverse and technology. You talk about the cost of the handset, you talked about the digital, the broadband, and connectivity. And a lot of times we're not quite there yet. It's still expensive, and a lot of people are not connected in a way that you can leverage the technology. And the tech is not completely built out. I mean, we're still talking about UX. We're still talking about bringing and bridging the fiat to the Web3 assets world. So there's all of that needs to be worked out. But what was really interesting, and we put that in the book, was Microsoft, which took me by surprise, because when we talked with them, we spent quite a bit of time with them.
Oh, you managed to squeak that in.
We did squeak that in. And they said, look, we think this is going to be interesting. We acknowledge the challenges that's there, but we think where it could be interesting is that the future is not about us all walking around, sitting around with headset. Is that this environment is going to be immersive in a way that we can all be there. We'll use our existing devices. We use our existing environment, and we use that from a business perspective first. And that will be the opening. Which
it'll probably replace your laptop screen or something like that.
Exactly. So, and I can totally see that is a way to get us into the world, no different than Apple, the Vision Pro. People are saying the headset is expensive and all of that. Well, but maybe version 1 is not a consumer device.
The first Macintosh, which was the Macintosh XL, was actually a Lisa. Was in today's money like $12,000 for an early personal computer in today's money. So I mean, look at the first mobile phone. Yeah, it was $4,500 or whatever.
Oh
right?
my God, yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Then the 90.
So this is $3,300 for a developer headset for some pretty cool tech is actually pretty reasonable historically speaking, but and leads of course to $500, $1,000 units that are super capable in a few years. The tech they've got in that thing is just amazing. We had Brian Romley and Robert Scoble on to talk about it the week of the launch, and it just a really amazing conversation in terms about where this sort of whole thing goes. So to my point, Apple is definitely going to be a key player in this. But in the models that you propose, you don't necessarily think that these big players are going to dominate, that there still may be room for more sort of community-based stuff, right?
We think so. And I hope so. I mean, if you look at the last big tech revolution, if you will, we've changed hands. New players have emerged and new things have emerged. So there's no reason why we wouldn't see the same thing. And that is, when it boils down to it, there's a lot of people that talk about, well, this is all full of, I'm not going to say this on air, but this is not real. And I'll say to it is the current version of the world leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, it's
we can we can beep you out if you want to drop the F-bomb or something.
I have maintained a streak of not doing it, so I'm gonna keep that. But there's room for improvement, to say the least, right? I don't like what a lot of the things that we see right now. I don't like where the power is. So if this is a new paradigm that we can try, why not?
What do you think? I didn't get into this in great detail. What do you think is the role that AI has to play in the metaverse space?
It's no different than asking what the role software plays in today's world, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's
fair
going to
enough.
be everywhere. I think it will get to the point where we'll stop talking about this as AI powered because it's everywhere. I mean, look
Right.
at
No, I
what you do
agree.
in the
In fact,
morning.
I've got a shtick that I do on stage that makes that exact point. So, yeah, no, I'm in fierce agreement. Yeah, we will have this period of advice where we are augmenting human advice with AIs, and people will naturally promote that as a differentiation from human-based advice. We use AI for wealth management. We use AI for giving you the best insurance deal. We use AI for giving you the best medical diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once we learn to trust that augmented advice, that it is actually the best advice that we could get, then we'll realize that, well, we really don't need the humans to give this advice because it's really the AI that's powering the advice. So let's plug in directly into the AI. That's my view.
You remind me of driving directions, right? Remember the days in the old days we used to get the paper maps from AAA, and then we evolved to printing the maps out from the computer.
Right.
And then we just hop into the car and follow Google Map or
Yeah.
Apple
Yeah,
Map and what have
exactly.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we
So
trust it. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So it's the
Agree.
same thing. I think what would be interesting and what I could see it playing out is the whole issue of data privacy and
Yes.
what we can do with the data and who have access and control with the data. And I think that correlates to some of the discontent that we might
Mm.
have with the big players right now is if you take a step back and you look at our roles in this digital society, I feel like humans are nothing more than producers for data to feed into this machine. So the
We should
question
have
is,
we should have Drumwave on. Actually, Drumwave has this data wallet concept that they've just launched in Brazil, which is pretty interesting as a way
ooh,
for people to monetize their data in a personal wallet. So pretty interesting concept. But yeah, we should get them on. But look, we're running out of time, Theo. So how do people find out about the metaverse economy? How finance professionals can make sense of Web3? There you go. I even put my
oh,
radio voice on.
I
Right.
like that.
I
So
could do
it
my Hollywood announcer voice as well. The
no, no, no.
metaverse economy. Okay. It's all right.
Nope, that last part was better. It's on Amazon. If you're in the UK, you're in luck. You can get it right away. If you are Brat, so
Yes,
guys,
I
you
have my
can't see
copy.
it exactly. You have your
Yeah,
copy.
I have
There,
my copy right here,
there are less
and
than 12
it was
people right
delivered
now that
personally
have
by
it.
mail. Yeah, well, that
Oh,
rocks, man. That's why I got you on the. That's why. See what happens. You do nice things. The host get you on the show.
you. And for the rest of Mere Models, sorry, they will be on Amazon end of the month. But
And it's already
yeah,
hit the number one bestseller for a
new release.
new release, right? So congrats on that. That never
Thank
gets
you.
old, right? It
It
never
never
gets
gets
old.
old.
You know,
Nope.
I mean,
Thank you.
I still am getting on Amazon, once every few weeks, looking at the rank of Bank Four because it's been in the top 10 for like 5 years, and I'm like, it can't still be there, right?
Well,
But
between you and
it's.
Paolo.
I know. Palo's the same, right?
So
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just
great.
glad we got a chance to just peek through a little bit. But
No, no, no. I mean, this is the thing. It's like I don't know why. I can say it's just a really good book, but
it
it's
is
just
a good book. Actually,
yeah.
you know, traveling back in time, that was how I met you, was you actually signed the book. I was like, oh my God, I just met God in person. It was in San Francisco.
I
I
had
think it
some.
was
I've
one of
had
the
some funny
cinemas.
interactions over the year with
Mm.
the whole book thing. I had someone come up to me in a lobby of a Singapore hotel in 2012. It was like, the 2 years after Bank, or a year after Bank Two launched, and they wanted my autograph just out of nowhere in this Singapore hotel. He's like, "Are you Brett King, the author of? I've got my book right here. I was just reading it." Um, and
I'm
that sort
glad
of
they
stuff.
didn't chase you down the bathrooms.
Yeah, true. That's a bit freaky. But you do, that's, I mean, that sounds a bit weird. You get used to that sort of being part of the job, you know. But no, this is great, man. You know, you've got this new book out. It always helps, always raises the profile. And, you know, it's for anyone who gets a book published. I know it's like when Elon says getting to orbit's really hard. I know how hard it is to get a book published. So I'm always grateful for the work that these authors put in and you know, for your contribution, Theo. So thanks.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I learned it from the best of you guys, so I appreciate it.
Collaboration is also very important in this game. Absolutely. So
yes.
Well, thanks very much. You're listening to Breaking Banks. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
This show is brought to you by Alloy Labs. As much as we love talking on the show, we believe that action is more valuable than talk. Alloy Labs is the industry leader in helping fearless bankers drive exponential growth through collaboration, exclusive partnerships, and powerful network effects that give them an unfair advantage. Learn more at alloylabs.com. Alloy Labs, banking unbound.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks. For this part of the show, we have Jason Henrichs joining me in the hosting chair. Hey, Jace.
Hello.
And we've got a great guest all the way from Europe, a name that will be known to most of you, I'm sure. She's an author in the space, a best-selling author now, and an influencer in many aspects of fintech policy, you know, operational aspects. She's worked in the trenches. Leda Glyptis, Dr. Leda Glyptis, welcome to the show.
Very, very good to be here with you guys.
The doctor is in the house.
Yes. So I know that you've recently been tweeting out a little bit about what's been happening in your, you know, home nation community back in Greece. And it's timely that we're just doing the show as, you know, we have this major wildfires happening in Hawaii. Of course, California and Australia have had to deal with this for a couple of years now, but you now have some pretty serious climate change impact stuff hitting Greece. As we were prepping for the show and we are just chatting, you were saying about the desertification of Greece. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
First of all, thank you for taking the time to talk about this, because it's deeply unpleasant. It is scary, and it is so easy for all of us to put it out of our mind and move forward. Greece is not alone in having these wildfires every summer. They're particularly bad in the southern Med. Greece has always had them, but the extent and the number of them seems to be increasing every year. Portugal had the same, parts of Italy had the same, and it's often caused by humans. It's not wildfires in a lot of these cases. It's carelessness or arson, and of course it's made worse by man-made climate change. And what we're hearing specifically for Greece is that the constant cycles of fires and the extremely limited reforestation has meant that in certain areas there is irreversible desertification in a country that was in the a sort of mild and gentle part of Europe. Greece has its problems, but climate was never one of those. We're hearing that there are areas that are just desert now, that have transitioned to an irreversible devastation of the flora and fauna. We're seeing foxes appear in urban areas, and I'm taking this podcast from London, where foxes in urban areas are normal. When I was growing up in Greece, foxes were in the same category as wolves and lions, wild animals you would know, but there's no safety and there's no food. And what we're also hearing is swarms of bees descending on islands and coastal areas as they flee the fires. And of course, you can imagine what happens if you run a 5-star resort in an unaffected island and all of a sudden you have swarms of bees. You're going to kill them to make it more comfortable for your...
Right, and the bee population's already at threat around the world.
Exactly. So you're hearing about these swarms of bees and these hotel managers who are the end of their wits because they see it as a threat to their livelihood, and you think we're all going to die.
Yeah. Like, I mean, this is the thing. You know, the implications of this, it is a system, And so we're talking about the sixth great extinction and that, but you're starting to see a flow-on effect of things. And we're having to realistically have a discussion these days about whether certain regions of the planet will remain habitable or livable for humans. I mean, this is an insane conversation to be having at the same time as fossil fuel companies trying to slow down adoption of renewables and green tech and so forth because they want to keep the gravy train going a bit longer. It just blows my mind. I know I can get a bit passionate about these things, but in terms of the broader fintech and financial services space, we have seen some debate about ESG and greenwashing. I did record an episode just for a podcast we're helping commercial banker Dubai in Dubai produce, and we had a couple of really good climatologists on talking about the fact that there is actually progress being made in this area, but there's also plenty of financial institutions that are still quite happy to keep supporting the old system. So what's
Brett, I think we need to call out, because at least in the US, and I think the same is still true globally, should banks and funds have a stance on ESG? Let's dig into the environmental piece of this, and it's part of this. You're just calling it out, this anti-woke.
And
it's
you
like,
be
oh,
a
I don't
responsible
want
bank, right?
Like I don't think banks should be taking a political stance, but I want to nail this and say it is not
climate's
a
not political
stance, right?
anymore, right?
Yeah, it's not political. Right? The U.S. Department of Defense says one of the greatest strategic risks in the world is actually climate change.
Yeah,
creating the deserts.
I agree with you. I think that we're past this being political. I know it is still being politicized, but we're past that. As you say, the population declines more, we die. That's not political. That's existential. Yeah. And I'm with you in my dismay of the greenwashing efforts that we have seen. And I have absolutely no doubt that there's a very large chunk of entities out there that play at ESG, that do just enough on the surface without it's exactly the same as we saw when we started our innovation and digitization work, when we saw the first diversity and inclusion. All of those initiatives, there is a very large chunk of entities that will do just enough just for show.
Slap on a press release and appoint someone to a head of a department
and buy some carbon credits. But I will say that I have seen some major systemic banks in Europe that are genuinely asking themselves the hard questions. And I was part of a piece of work that entailed looking at their technology footprint and assessing the quality of electricity used in the various countries where they had exposure, either through their cloud providers or through more traditional data centers, and actually taking a view of the quality of electricity. Now, that's a second order consideration. And I would say that in the UK and the US, most entities are nowhere near there.
No, actually, it's interesting that you've had players like Apple and Google sort of be, and Amazon be leaders in this front, because, they are large providers of obviously data centers and technology. And so they've had to make sure they've got that box ticked from a reputation perspective. But more banks should be definitely looking at this. And I think I don't think it's a political position. I think it's a moral position now.
I totally agree with you. I think inevitably we'll have some political ramifications. So, for instance, the exercise I was part of inevitably led to a conversation around nuclear energy production, because from a carbon footprint perspective, nuclear energy production is cleaner.
And there's some next-gen nuclear technology that looks pretty interesting, like thorium reactors and so forth, right?
Exactly. Now, the adoption of nuclear energy production in countries that haven't gone down that path is a deeply political conversation. Yeah. So you are inevitably, particularly if you're a global entity and you're assessing the ESG ramifications of your global footprint, and you're genuinely committed to having a lighter tread on the planet and using cleaner energy, those conversations will inevitably become linked to policies around energy production, employment. Because if you think about the European Union context, how easy would it be for some of these banks to go, okay, we're going to consolidate all of our exposure in France that produces nuclear-backed electricity versus those 3 other countries. And all of a sudden you have a major employer withdrawing 1,000 jobs, 2,000 jobs. So I think I agree with you. It is a moral issue. The ramifications will be political very soon, and we have to face into it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any avoiding it. We're right in the midst of it right now, and the costs a damage, from these extreme weather events is rapidly increasing. We're talking about in the 2020s, the average cost is something like 40 times what it was in the 1980s in terms of extreme weather events, economic impact.
Right. I think that's important, right? Like, so you can say it's a moral issue, and I don't want to get into the morality. You can say it's a political, and Leda, I loved how you frame that is. It's not a political issue, but it is a politicized issue. Put those two things aside. It is also an economic issue, Brad. Like
right.
That's where, you're going with, like, assume you're okay just blowing up the planet for everyone else in future generations, and assume that you want to deny everything else. The economics, if we look at the insurance industry and, going broke, exiting certain regions, as a result of this, there's economics at play here as well.
Yeah, people can't get insurance for homes in Florida and California now because of this. It's uninsurable. And if you can't get insurance, you can't get mortgage insurance, you can't get a mortgage for a home. So, the implications of this, broadly economically speaking, are pretty significant.
And I totally agree with you. And I think there's 2 sides to this. One is the immediate impact of the damage, both to the businesses and homes that are destroyed, and to rebuild them, you both need to face into the inability to get insurance for the next time, the claims. When there is one catastrophic event, it's hard enough, but when these are cumulative, you get black swan events, and the protection isn't there. So you have businesses going under. The mechanism for making these making reparations are strained. And I read this article last week that said for Greece alone, preventative measures to manage the impact of such fires in the future would require an investment of 700 billion euros.
Wow.
That's for Greece alone. Now, the terrain of Greece is difficult because it's very small and very fragmented with islands and mountains, but it's a pocket-sized country. So if the investment that you would need in preventative measures, which is what we're all asking for, right? Stop this from continuing, is in the region of 700 billion. Imagine if where's that going to come from?
Russia or China. Yeah. No, it's the implications of this seem pretty clear on a medium term and longer term basis, that there will be some point where the math just doesn't make sense anymore. Right. And the one area that I think, at the moment we have the refugee crisis, which is hitting Europe at the moment. And I saw a figure that this year, everyone's freaking out about the immigration crisis. And this year we've seen 37,000 immigrants hit the European Union. Right.
Wow.
But the estimates for the mid 2040s, based on these climate events and based on food scarcity, range between 300 million and 1 billion eco-refugees. Right, so look at the chaos that's happening in Greece and the surrounding countries with 37,000 immigrants, and now we're talking about 1 billion people being displaced.
Wow.
Like you can't. There's no number you can put on that makes it relevant or make any sense.
You're absolutely right. And we don't have the mental models to process what it all means. When I was doing my PhD, which is about 20 years ago now, there was a chap called François Gemène who was doing a PhD on environmental refugees. And I thought at the time I didn't know enough about this, but he was specifically looking at some Fijian islands that are sinking at such a rate that their small populations, I think it was Tuvalu he was looking at, the populations will need to be homed somewhere else. Now, Australia had offered to take that population in, but without allowing them to retain their nationality. And that's what he was working on, because Australia's view is your country won't exist
Bloody
anymore. I will give you an Australian passport. I mean, it's not illogical, right? You cannot be a citizen of a country that doesn't exist. But or can you? The legal framework.
Well, you can be in the Vatican in Italy, right? So
yeah, exactly.
A precedent, right?
Exactly. But it touches on a very interesting. There's human suffering, right? And I don't want to belittle it, but the legal framework constructs we have around refugees is that when the crisis that drives them out of home is over, they might want to return.
Right.
The idea that the place that they have come from is uninhabitable, not because of danger, because of a landslide or war, but because it has now been turned into a desert.
Yeah. And if you
can't, we're prepared for.
Yeah, and if you can't prevent homelessness in your own nation, then what chance have you got of providing housing for, 100 million or 200 million refugees, if that's your share of that global event?
Exactly.
Yeah, we really are going, this is the question I've had, when I wrote Technosocialism, the question I had around this was, what was the number before that question that we hear so often, which is who's going to pay for it, when that question becomes morally dubious, right? Or morally reprehensible for someone to ask that question. What's the number that we have to get to? I don't know the answer. Hopefully it's not 500 million people, but I suspect it's probably something in that order,
And it's going to be getting higher every year we don't do something about it. This
is a cheery show to do on a
Friday afternoon. This isn't how I wanted to kick off a Friday morning, guys. I realize it's nighttime for the two of you, but you're ruining my Friday here.
All right. Well, how do we fix it? If we're giving advice to banks and regulators in the space, what can we do as an industry to make this better?
I think we need to bring it to the forefront, Brett. Like it isn't a marketing ESG, especially the environmental part of this, can't be part of a marketing claim or the greenwashing aspect of it.
Right.
It needs to be front and center to how we think about where we invest and how we invest.
It has to be it's our interpretation of our social responsibility to the community around us, right?
I agree with that. I would take a sort of harsher stab at it and say that when we're looking at businesses, when we invest in businesses, when we choose to partner with businesses, their sustainability is always a consideration, right? You're not going to go into business with someone that you think is not long for this world. You just won't do it. And what we're doing is we're treating the planet like it is more expandable than it is. So that longevity and sustainability of the things we do has to become a financial consideration. Things like biodiversity, climate change. At the end of the day, if you want to continue being in business, you need people to be around and alive to continue consuming your services. So I think there are a couple of pieces that boards will need to do that are hard work in changing their time horizon for assessing returns on investments. If you go quarter on quarter, you don't care if the bees all die. But if you think about the next 5 to 10 years, then all of a sudden it matters a lot. I think we also, and that's closer to our world in fintech, we talk a good game about inclusion. We talk a good game about financial access. But the reality is that the tools we provide are not context specific. If we look at the people that are most affected by these disasters, they tend to be the people who are more insecurely housed, the more insecurely employed. And then, you can have a pretty app.
Well, this is actually an interesting point, because we still haven't solved financial inclusion. And what we do know from, who's that refugee group we had on? Was International Rescue.
Yep.
Which sounds like the Thunderbirds. That's why I always remember it. But
nice.
But these guys came on and they said, one of the biggest issues you have in refugee camps is, the bank accounts that they had before they fled their home countries no longer work. They're not accessible. They don't have ways to get access to cash, and so, in natural disasters, the financial system does sort of tend to break down as well. So, digital inclusion's a path towards that, but what do you guys think in terms of practical solutions? Are you seeing any actions in Greece to help people sort of get through these problems, Leda, tactically?
Some of the initiatives we have seen have been charity driven. There's some people like Janse Antetokounmpo who have put their money where their mouth is and have taken out entire hotels for the affected families to live. And that is, it warms your heart to know that there's that level of care in the world, but it doesn't solve for access. So it solves the problem by paying for it. But the world of, we're in insurance was the thing you were talking about earlier. What we should be able to offer these people, the ones that have insurance, is quick access. You're past proving what happened because it's on the news globally.
Yeah, exactly.
And we know that from a regulatory perspective, the regulator is mindful of black swan events. So the insurers that cover all of these people should be able to be like, draw down immediately. I will give you whatever you need because you've paid for it. So that piece is easy, and it doesn't solve everything, but we haven't put pressure on the right people for it. The second piece is long-term reconstruction, right? At the end of the day, I would like to see companies caring enough to put money behind reconstruction, but if they don't care without incentives, then let's see governments
and broad climate adaptation and mitigation as well, right?
But why wouldn't you give some early mover advantages as a government? Sweeten that pill. We know it needs to happen. Make it easier.
And I think it's the ease piece, right? Like, we know it needs to happen. We need to take the friction out.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need to take the friction out. You're 100% right. And we need to make sure that the alternatives won't be viable for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a mosquito.
Stick and carrot. Stick, carrot, and take the friction out.
Exactly.
And if there's any bigger stick than existential threat that your customers will, be dead or displaced in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know what else we can do to incentivize people.
Exactly. Stay in business, stay alive.
Well, unfortunately, we are in that time frame now, right? Like, this is no longer, generations to come are going to be impacted.
Yeah.
Everyone here is being impacted right now.
We are feeling the effects of climate change already. There's no mistake. We are in the midst of climate change, right? So it doesn't, this is why I get frustrated over arguments of whether it's being caused by humans or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, we're in the midst of this thing, and we've got to either adapt or, we have a risk to the species. That's how binary it is. So the fact that we are continuing on, like, we've got more time before we have to do something is crazy, but we don't have the tools, as you said earlier, Leda. We don't have the tools to conceptualize how great a change this is. Now, we have shown as humanity we're quite adaptable. When, the Second World War came along and so forth, we can put our entire national efforts and, the efforts of all our corporations and institutions behind, an effort to mitigate the effects of this. But this is not like a warfare situation. It sort of is. Like, the climate's declared war on humanity.
And actually,
we declared war on it, right?
I would agree. So I think that the type of focus we need on this is weirdly akin to the way the world faced into the COVID crisis. And I won't for a moment suggest that everything that was done was properly thought through and accurate, but there was a global realization that this has no boundaries. And this could be life-defining and life-ending for us as a community. And it wasn't every man for himself. And the urgency and focus and realization that it's not Germany's problem or France's problem, it's everyone's problem. I think that degree of focus is what we need now for
there's no such thing as a national climate change policy, right?
Yeah.
There isn't.
There's a global one, and that's it. Right.
And that's what we have seen in the European context, right? Because it's such a small space. And
this is maybe why Europe is sort of going to lead on this, I think, in terms of standard setting. Maybe.
I think the Central and Northern European countries have had a national climate policy and an environmental awareness much more than, say, where I come from. But within the EU construct, that belief that this doesn't stop at your borders has been pushed out and out and out. And you see that we have so much work to do, but there's at least an awareness that there is nothing you can do on your own here. It's all of us, or we all suffer.
Yeah, yeah. No, we're all in this together. This is
on that happy note.
Exactly. See, we fixed it.
We're coming.
But that's
to time,
it. That's it.
think,
I mean, if we do act together, if we do it together, we can get through this.
Exactly.
Sorry, Jason.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to bring this to the close, I think we need to make it at the forefront, and it needs to be collective, because, as I'm extremely cognitive of, with the impact we've had from the Canadian wildfires and the number of times we couldn't even go outside, climate change doesn't like to play by borders, right? And it doesn't also like to play by, it's going to stay out of the banking sector. And I think as financial service firms, we need to really lean into it.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see countries like the UK, Australia, United States try and have policy to say, we're not going to take these Zika refugees. But again, that's not a moral position. Anyway, I'm getting back into the conversation. I don't want to do that. So, hey, Leda, what have you got happening right now that people can be watching? You got your Leda Talks, right?
Yes, Leda Talks and Leda Writes.
Leda
I
Writes.
have my a couple of talks coming up in the next few months. Some in a conference near you. I will be at Cybos, and you can get a copy of my book there as well.
Well, we're going to do a special show at Cybos, which I think you're going to be involved in, which is going to take a look at the last 10 years of Inner Tribe. From the Cybos stage, including some clips from previous panels and stuff like that. So we're going to produce a special show for Cybos. So
that'll be very cool. See if we can still stand by the things we said 15 years ago. Yeah,
true. All right.
Thank you for joining us, Leda. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Breaking Banks.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.